Good evening and welcome back to 31 Horror Nights. It's October 13th and tonight's movie is The Menu. This is a horror comedy movie from 2022 starring Anya Taylor-Joy, who is no stranger to horror nights. She had a leading role in Late Night in Soho, one of the best movies from last year. It also features Ralph Fiennes as the main chef of the evening. I'm pretty sure most people in the general public would know him as Voldemort from the Harry Potter movies, but he also had some other pretty notable roles in some pretty notable movies like Schindler's List, The English Patient, and The Grand Budapest Hotel. From the trailer, I guess that the plot is that Anya Taylor-Joy is part of a couple, man and woman, who are going to this unbelievably fancy dinner night, restaurant, something. There are only 12 guests, and it's like super avant garde. We were given a lot of information, but it didn't really seem to coalesce very well. Something weird is happening, though, behind the scenes, and eventually it might lead to all the guests dying. From the horror comedy perspective, the tone from the trailer really reminds me of Ready or Not, and if the whole movie is going to be like Ready or Not, I'm very excited because I loved that film. And I guess both films are about a young woman whose rich boyfriend drags her into something kind of kooky. But just how kooky remains to be seen. I'm gonna go give it a watch. I finished watching The Menu, and I'm gonna give it a 9 out of 10. That movie was a lot of fun. I would compare it to Ready or Not. It's not as funny as that movie was, but I think it does have a better ending. I would call it a horror comedy, but it really just feels like a very dark comedy. The main source of humor in this movie is just showing these rich, privileged people doing what they do in a very clinical way that just shows how dumb they're all acting. This movie is divided between people who act like they are above everything else in the world and people who are constantly trying to kiss up to them. And I guess, like, the main character, Margot, who's like the one normal character in this movie. When people think of good acting, they think of like those big explosive performances or like those really, really dramatic performances. I don't think the role of the everyman should be scoffed at. They're very important, and Anya Taylor-Joy does a great job as that in this movie. No complaints in that regard. Ralph Fiennes is also incredible in his performance, which, yeah, duh. And this movie also does have a very memorable cast of characters overall. We got the rich husband and wife who clearly hate each other and are constantly fighting in like a very passive aggressive, bitter way. You have this really rich and distinguished food critic lady and her assistant who spends the entire night glazing her as hard as he possibly can. You have this washed up former movie star who thinks he still has it, like Troy McClure from The Simpsons, and his hot little side piece who doesn't like him, is just there for the money. Then you have these three guys who clearly are all trust fund babies. They probably never had to work a day in their life. They're rude to everybody, and they just spend money like there's no tomorrow. It's like, I don't care how much trouble I'll get. Like, daddy will bail me out. But I believe that the Biggest Loser award deserves to go to Tyler, Margot's date. It starts out feeling relatively normal between the two of them. They act like they're, dating. They act friendly with each other. But as the movie keeps going, you sort of realize that Tyler sort of just lives in his own, like, fan fiction of reality where he absolutely idolizes the chef behind this restaurant called Hawthorne, and he says all this foodie stuff. And I swear he basically said, "Notice me, senpai," so many times in this film. It got to the point where he was talking down to Margot in his fanboyism. I think at one point he literally uses the word child when referring to her, and she puts a stop to that immediately and says, "No, you cannot talk to me like that." And he just goes on not caring. Basically, how to demonstrate the kind of man Tyler is. He was told by one of the many staff workers at this restaurant that they are not allowed to take pictures. And he takes pictures of the first two courses. And then there's a course that's tacos, and the tortillas have like a laser burnt design on them, which is revealing a bunch of dark secrets about all the diners. And his was pictures of him taking pictures of his food. And Margot is reasonably a little bit put off by this. Like, why are they taking covert pictures of us and then printing it out on the food that they're giving us? But then he goes, "Oh no, do you think the chef is mad at me?" Like, this man is such a loser. That is the crux of a lot of the comedy in this movie. Seeing these people who are in their own privileged bubbles, living out their lives, showing them acting like morons with no self awareness, or at least no shame. And one interesting sort of parallel in this movie is that a lot of it is the rich people being very surprised when the workers and the staff at this place are not like bending to their will. One of the main like PR like tour guide people working is Elsa, played by Hong Chow. She did great. It was a little bit like Lily from Late Night with the Devil last night because she acts very polite and speaks very polite, but you can tell, despite how cheerful she acts, she loathes all the guests and everything they stand for. There was a point where those three trust fund baby guys say, "Hey, can we have some bread?" And bread was not on the menu for that course. And she says, "No." And he's like, "Don't worry, it's fine. Just, we'll pay you. Just give us the bread." And she goes, "No." And then, like, one of them says, "Excuse me, do you know who I am?" And then she says, "Yes, I know exactly who you are." There are moments like that all over this movie, and it is funny. I'm just saying that because there is a parallel between the fact that all of the rich, entitled people are still playing along with this weird stuff that's happening at this restaurant. And I think it's because they just expect the whole world to play to the beat of their drum. So they can't imagine that anything could actually be happening that's bad, except for Margot. She doesn't seem to come from a rich, privileged background, and she actually questions things, and she actually kind of stands up for herself in a way that none of the other people even try to. In general, this movie is very funny. I don't think it's quite as funny as Ready or Not. I will say there is one joke in this movie that I actually had to pause the movie. I was laughing so hard. I was cackling. I could barely breathe. The horror was not super strong. Basically the plot is a lot like Unfriended, where you think you're being presented with a situation, but as it develops, you learn not only are none of the characters what they say they are, but all or most of them are absolutely reprehensible as people. If you like these dark comedies that even like dredge into horror movie territories a few times, like if you liked Ready or Not, I think you'll like The Menu. This movie was a lot of fun. And now I want to talk about a few spoilers. My idea going into this, just from watching the trailer, is that this was supposed to show these rich, entitled people how they have so much, and yet they can't even be bothered to treat their fellow man with any sort of decency. And honestly, my vibe was not far off. Apparently, these people all contributed to the head chef, Chef Julian, played by Ralph Fiennes, losing his love for cooking. And he is going to expose all of them as the terrible people that they are, give them a taste of their own medicine, force them to confront how reprehensible they are, and then everybody is going to die. All the staff, all the guests, everybody is going to die at the end of the night. They did their homework on everybody. They got the dirt, they got the tea, they knew exactly what to do and say to get under these people's skin, with the exception of Margot, because she was not originally the plus one that Tyler was going to bring. And she acts differently from everybody else. I've mentioned that already. And they try to pull her aside and say, it's like, hey, you weren't really supposed to be a factor in this. But obviously, even though she doesn't really care for anybody else at the party, including Tyler, she also really doesn't want to die. Her name isn't even Margot. I think she said it was Erin, but I'm just going to call her Margot because that's what we can know her as for most of the movie. She is actually an escort. Maybe not strictly a sexual escort. There is elements of that, but it mostly just seems like someone that rich people can call and then pretend to be someone with them for a night. And that is exactly what Tyler did. He couldn't come without a plus one, so he just called up some random person. And he knew going into this that the plan was for all of them to die. So he literally has no regard for her life or her safety. And then one of the courses is Tyler getting the most thorough public humiliation I have ever seen in a movie. I don't think you can comprehend how much of a pants pulling session this was if you didn't watch the whole movie up to that point. So I won't even go into detail. It ends with the chef whispering something that we don't even get to hear in his ear. And then later, when Margot is sent off to go get something, long story, she looks in a closet and sees him hanging by his tie. And that does shock her. That does give her pause, but then she kind of just hardens her gaze and walks away. And while she is out and about, again, long story. And by the way, this is on an island. Like, even if they got out of the building, like, what are they going to do? They don't have a boat. But she goes to his living quarters, which was briefly shown at the beginning, and she finds a few pictures in his office. And I do like how they were able to tell this all visually with no words. There are pictures of him at these big fancy restaurants with like being awarded with all these accomplishments and like being handed keys to stuff, and he's never smiling. She does find a picture of him, like an employee of the month thing, when he was very young, when he was working at like a burger joint in some random town in the middle of nowhere, and he's smiling. He looks happy. And that does kind of demonstrate how much this world has taken out of him. It took away his greatest passion. Obviously, that doesn't really make him a sympathetic character, but that does provide a little bit of context. And when she gets back to the dinner services, she really needs to find a way to get out of there quick because dessert's almost coming. So then she has the idea to do the one thing that none of these other people ever did: stand up and say, I don't like your food, directly to the chef's face. And he has given pause by that. And she says, I don't taste any love in this cooking. This doesn't taste like food meant to be enjoyed. This was made with obsession. And like, she's clearly trying to play up the situation. Then she says, I would like a cheeseburger. And he makes it for her. He makes a normal, like, diner burger for her with these crinkle cut fries. And I gotta say, this looks like a very good cheeseburger. Like, I would want that cheeseburger. Maybe not for $10, but I would want that cheeseburger. And she takes a bite and says, that is a cheeseburger, and then asks for it to go. I was wondering what exactly her end goal in all this was. And then that made me realize, wait a minute, she's just trying to save her own ass. And she is. And she does. And it works. And like she's leaving and she looks back, and the woman from the married couple that were fighting all the time, she actually kind of like shoos her away. It's like, no, we've made our bed. You can leave. And she does. She gets on a boat. She sails away with the cheeseburger. And the dessert course was a take on the s'more, where all the guests are given these like chocolate hats and like marshmallow shirts or whatever. It's silly. And the entire place goes up in flames. And there's a gas explosion. And the movie ends with her eating the rest of that burger and wiping her mouth with the menu from the place. I thought this ending was good, but considering how immaculate the build-up was, I don't know if it was quite satisfying enough. Still, it was a good ending. This movie is a lot of fun. It's very dark fun, but it's fun. I would recommend it. It is a lot like Ready or Not. I thought it was really good. Okay, thank you for listening. I'll see you tomorrow.